All right, tonight we continue the study we started last week on death and dying. And by the way, the next 2 weeks I will be in the tent meeting, so the adult class in the back will be meeting in here. I'm not sure what they're studying, but it'll just be a consolidated adult class for those weeks. But anyway, for tonight we're going to continue talking about the subject of death and dying. And this is really something that we've done very little teaching on as far as Bible classes. And you know, we sometimes preach a sermon on dying and death and funerals and such, but as far as just a Bible study, and frankly, some people are uncomfortable with it. But another aspect of this subject that I think I want us to consider before getting into some more specifics down the road, and that is just, what is your life? You know, we go through life, we live, we mature, we marry, we get jobs, we grow old, we have families, and not necessarily in this order, all of these things, but you know, we kind of know what life is, but do we really know what life is? And do we really appreciate it? You remember the words of the psalmist in Psalm 34 and verse 12. He raises a question here. What man is he that desireth life and loveth many days, that he may see good? Now, this is what we would call a rhetorical question, because I think the answer is obvious. We all desire life. We all desire many days. And we all desire to see good. I mean, is there anybody here who would say, no, I don't want those things? I don't recall ever meeting anyone who said, you know, my goal in life is to die young. My goal in life is to have a miserable existence. To go through life unhappy. No. And, you know, when we're young, you know, teenagers and maybe in college, you know, we like to think about our life in the future. You know, we're going to be successful and we're going to grow old and we're going to be healthy and just life is going to be picture book, so to speak. But, of course, we realize it doesn't always work out that way. And I think we would always agree that life is a precious commodity. And maybe we don't think about it, but the older we get, the more precious we realize it is. You know, in grade school, a week was a long time, especially Monday to Friday. I mean, seriously, you know, Monday you go, oh man, 5 days. And now, Monday, and I blink, and it's Thursday, and the week's gone. And it gets faster and faster. Life is, how precious is life to you? Comments, anyone? Is life precious to you? What's your life worth? Anybody here give their life for $1 million? I know, we all know some people we'd give their life for $1 million maybe. But I mean, let's face it, you're probably thinking, well, what good would $1 million be if I'm dead, right? Okay, how about 10 million? Anybody give their life for $10 million? If you think I'm kissing that fuzzy face. Okay, what if you got the $10 million and you don't have to die for a year? Some, maybe. But let's face it, most people are not willing to give up their life for anything. Or are they? How many people go through life doing things that are destructive? And I'm kind of getting away from where I started here. But just a thought popped into my mind. How many people are doing things in life that they know deep down is going to shorten their life? Whether it's smoking, using drugs, alcohol, or other risky behavior, shall we call it. You know, they might not take money for their life, but they're willing to exchange the length of life for pleasure, or what's deemed to be pleasure. You know, years ago, there was a television commercial, and I really don't remember what the commercial was about, but I do remember the byline. It says, if you have your health, you have just about everything. And that's pretty much true, because if you don't have your health, what do you have? How many times have we seen people who are so debilitated by an illness that they are perhaps hooked to breathing machines or other life-saving things? And maybe I'm the only one that's ever thought this, but I look and I think, wow, that's not living. That's not life. to be kept alive on a machine day in and day out, month after month, year after year. So we all have our own concept of what life is. We all have a pretty general idea of what life is worth to us. What are we willing to do to preserve our lives and to stay alive? Sadly, many people don't realize the preciousness of life until it comes time to face death. The doctor says, "I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do." Or perhaps they get test results back and the doctor says, "Look, you only have a short time to live." Or maybe, and we've all done this, stood by the casket of a friend and we think, they were so young. And we begin to realize just how precious life is. And sometimes it's on those occasions that we really get serious. Oh, well, I've got to take better care of myself. I'm going to start eating better. I'm going to start exercising, or I'm going to do whatever. Because I don't want to have that premature heart attack or stroke or whatever it may be. I read about a man years ago that, it was quite a few years ago, when $50,000 was a lot of money, but the doctor said, "You don't have long to live." And he said, "I'll give $50,000 to anybody who can grant me any longer time to live." And of course, no one could do anything. Millions feel the same way as they get older, as they face health problems and problems in life. And consequently, people today spend millions and millions of dollars going to specialists, seeking out someone who can cure or at least alleviate whatever their health problem or problems may be. And while we don't admit it, aren't most people looking for, shall we call it, the fountain of youth? They're looking for something, and I don't mean just physical youth, but, to stay young, to stay healthy. Because deep down, the average person is terrified of what? Death and dying. I'm not talking about Christians, but sadly, even a lot of Christians have a hard time dealing with the subject of death and dying. I had somebody tell me one time that I don't go to funerals. Well, why not? I just don't like to be around dead people. And they weren't kidding. They had a phobia. They had an unnatural fear about being around funeral homes and cemeteries and death and dying. But the two insurmountable realities of life, the two inescapables, are life and death. If we're born, we're going to die. Unless, of course, the Lord returns first. And nobody thinks much about the being born part. That happens without us knowing about it, at least until we're older. But as we get older, we begin to spend more time thinking about death and dying, Ecclesiastes 7 and verse 1, Solomon writes, "Better the day of death than the day of one's birth." Now that sounds odd to us, doesn't it? The idea the day of death is better than the day of one's birth. In what way is that true? Obviously, these words have to be taken within the context of a child of God. Now, if we're talking about someone who is in a lost condition, someone who was not a child of God, then that's not true. But for the faithful child of God, death brings an end to what? Yeah, that sums it up. Troubles of this life: sickness, sorrow, pain, hurt, concern over family, whatever. Because in death, those things will be a thing of the past. But at the same time, the average person in the world, life is all about what? Yeah, it is what you make it. Remember the beer commercial a few years ago? You only go around once in life, grab all the gusto. Yeah. And that's the attitude that the average person in the world has. Hey, go for all, have all the fun you can have, do all the things you can do, live it up because you only live once. And if you're thinking about just the here and now, if this is the only priority in your life is this world, then that, I guess, could be okay advice. But for those who believe the Bible, for those who understand that there is something far more than just this short physical earthly existence, It's not about having the most fun, about doing the most things, gathering the most toys, experiencing the most thrills. There's far more to it than that. You know, when we think about life on the physical plane, from a physical aspect, you know what where the word biology comes from? Megan, you've probably studied that. What's biology come from? Put you on the spot. Biology comes from the Greek word bios, and it refers to the natural life, human or animal. And of course, biology is something we study in high school. It was a subject I did not do well in, did not like. But physical life, earthly life, is very fragile. It's very uncertain. It's very frail. You know, in the one sense, the human body is very strong. It's very resilient. But then at the same time, life can be taken just like that. Sometimes by the most insignificant things. I'm thinking back to a man that Dad knew and worked with years ago. Union City, Tennessee. Worked in a hardware store, and he carried a big single blade knife, and he was opening a bag of potato chips one day on the break, and he dropped that knife, and it went into the calf of his leg. And it hit the artery. And he was dead by the time they got him to the hospital. How fragile. A man who otherwise was strong and healthy, probably in his late 40s, possibly early 50s, dead opening a bag of potato chips. And we all know people like that. Well, life is so frail like that. In fact, Peter describes it like this in 1 Peter 1 and verse 24. He says, "For all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man is the flower of grass. The grass withereth, and the flower thereof falleth away." You know, grass may be green today, but it turns dry. It's brown and dead tomorrow. The flower comes out, it's beautiful, it's lush, and again in a day or two, it's dead and gone. And so at the very best, life is not only uncertain, but it's short. Remember what James said in James chapter 4 and verse 14. He says, "Whereas ye know not what shall be on the morrow, for what is your life? For ye are a vapor." Now one translation says a mist. "But ye are a vapor or a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." James here, of course by inspiration, is describing businessmen who are planning to go on a business trip, for lack of a better term. They're planning to go to a city, and they're going to do business. They're going to buy. They're going to sell. They're going to trade. They're going to get gain, he says. They're going to make a profit. But in the midst of all of their planning, James asks them the question, and all of us the same question: what is your life? What is your life? And by asking this question, James is calling our attention to the fact that we don't know. We have no lease on life. We have no guarantee of a tomorrow. You know, I can say I'm going to Hillsboro this weekend to start a gospel meeting. But I don't know that. I could drop dead tomorrow. I could have a stroke, a heart attack, be incapacitated. And so when we make plans, whether they're plans for work, whether they're plans for pleasure, plans to spend time with family, in the back of our mind, you know, we need to at least think, you know, if it's God's will. Yeah. That's the whole attitude. That if it's God's will, I'll do this. If I live, I'll do this. But yet, don't we usually, I'm talking about people in general, don't we usually go through life with, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to retire, and we're going to move to Florida, and I'm going to golf every day, or whatever I like to do. And, you know, we've got it all planned out. But how many times are those plans interrupted? How many times does it not work the way I have it planned? Of course, again, the idea that we don't have any knowledge of tomorrow. And of course, we should live each day as though it were the last. And when he says there that life is a vapor, it's a mist. It is like a cloud of smoke coming off a tea kettle. It's brief. And that's his whole point. What's your philosophy about life? Different people look at life in different ways. And of course, there are many more than we've got time to look at. But and it's interesting to listen to people. And I guess different generations have different views. If you'll pardon a 1960s slang expression, kids used to talk about something, say, oh, it's a drag. A lot of people view life as a drag. Not something to be enjoyed, not something that's pleasurable, just something simply to be endured. And that's the way a lot of people view life. They're like an animal on a treadmill operating some kind of machinery, a grist mill or whatever. There's no joy, there's no purpose, there's no happiness in life. They're just travelers. They work 9 to 5, the same job, they travel the same roads, they live in the same neighborhood, they hang out with the same uninteresting people, talk about the same uninteresting things, they watch the same boring reruns. And I've actually had people say this. My life is boring. I do the same thing day in and day out. And to them, life is a drudgery. That may be, but I think a lot of it is they don't understand the purpose in life. If life is all about one big high, one big joyous experience, then you're going to be disappointed. If it's all about me, what I can get out of it, and the good time I can enjoy, then it's going to be disappointing. It's going to be a drudgery. But if life to you is about serving and helping others, about bettering self, life should never be boring. If you're ever bored and got nothing to do, see Bill Phillips. Bill's got a lot of things need done. And Bill has stayed busy and does stay busy. And that's what life is all about, not sitting around waiting. Yes, Megan? Yeah. Well, Megan is just developing the point that I'm making here. If we do, as Christians, what we're instructed to do, serving others, helping others, spreading the gospel, trying to improve ourselves, we're going to be busy. Life's never going to be boring. There's plenty to do. But you see, if life is all about watching television or doing things for fun and for pleasure, for self-gratification, then it can get boring. Even the best of times get old when we do nothing but those things repetitively. And so life that's based on this philosophy of, let's call it philosophy of selfishness, is going to be a drag, and that's the way a lot of people view life. And consequently, these are the people who have the highest rate of what? I think I heard somebody say it. Suicide, right. It's amazing some of the notes that people leave. I had nothing to live for. I was bored. How could anyone say they've got nothing to live for? I guess there are people like that, but, I've got my family. I've got my church family. There are so many things to live for, and there's so many things that I want to accomplish and do. I could never be bored if I tried. But yet, that's the way a lot of people are. Yep. Yeah. And just to use that as a springboard, people who are grateful, people who are of a gratitude, well, that's not bad. Anyway, that have an attitude of gratitude, we'll call it, they're going to want to return some of that. If somebody's really nice to us, somebody goes out of their way to help us, to do something for us, don't we usually look for an opportunity to return that kindness? The attitude of gratitude. I appreciate what Jonathan did for me. Yeah. And so I'm going to look for an opportunity to help Jonathan. Yeah. Might even let him have a piece of that pecan pie, just a little. But on the other hand, if I'm not grateful, I'm not going to recognize any kind of indebtedness to others. And that would extend to God. I mean, are we grateful for what God has done for us? Are we grateful to what our family has done, continues to do for us? Or are we grateful for our friends? For that matter, for our country, for our nation? If we have that attitude of gratitude, we're going to look for opportunities to be helpful, to return that kindness to others. And again, life is not going to be boring. And again, others view life as being just one big pleasure trip. You know, it's all about fun and excitement. They don't want responsibility. They don't want any obligation to anyone. It's about what they can do for kicks. And you know, pleasure is kind of like drugs. And I confess I've never been a drug user other than prescription stuff. But you know, I understand that those who use drugs, you know, the first time they need just a little bit, and the next time they need a little more. And the longer they use those drugs, the more they need to get the same kick, high, whatever the expression would be. And that's the way with pleasure. You know, I can remember when an ice-cold Coca-Cola was the greatest thing in the world. And we didn't get them very often. And yes, if you remember when you get drinks out of the machine and they had ice in them, that was the old days. Now if they're lukewarm, that was a pleasure. Today, I got to have something with that Coke. It doesn't do the same for me. Think back to the simple pleasures that we enjoyed when we were young, newlyweds. When Joanne and I first got married, we were like most young couples. We didn't have a lot of money to go and spend, just go out and do stuff. And going to the mall was a thrill because you had to drive 30, 45 minutes to get to a mall. And so Friday night, we'd dress up and go to the mall. And you know what we did? We got an ice cream cone at McDonald's. You remember those days, Joanne? We'd get a soft serve and we'd walk around the mall. And when they closed the mall, we went home. That was our Friday night. But it was fun. Now, if I suggested let's go to the mall and get a McDonald's ice cream tonight, she'd probably roll her eyes and give me a look. But you know, those were simple times, simple pleasures. But if we're not careful, we become addicted to pleasure, and we need more and more and more to get that same kick. And sadly, what a lot of people view as pleasure is not really pleasure. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. And as I say, you know, created in the image of God, God wants us to enjoy life. God expects us to be happy. But what God views as happiness and what a lot of people view as happiness is total different things. You know, I've always found it amazing how anyone can find it pleasurable to get sloppy drunk. I used to work in a sawmill, and if you want some really high moral standard people, work in a sawmill. On Friday night, all the way up till 5 o'clock, oh man, I'm going to get roaring drunk tonight. We're going to have a good time. And as soon as 5 o'clock, man, they would cash their checks, and they were gone. And Saturday morning, invariably, most of them would come in late. They were staggering. Some of them had dents in their cars. And all morning long, oh, I can't believe I did that. I am so sick. And they'd go around the wood pile, and they would get sick, try to be nice. And then you hear, oh, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to drink again. Next Friday, you'd roll around, same thing. Boy, we're going to party tonight. And even as a teenager, I kept thinking, is this supposed to be fun? You know. And they would come in, I blew my whole paycheck. They blew a week's paycheck. And usually couldn't tell you where or how, other than the fact they'd been out partying. That's the world's concept of pleasure. That's the world's idea of having a good time. Yeah, empty wallet and a hangover. And we wonder, we look around, literally there are tens of millions of alcoholics in America today. Probably as many or more drug addicts. There are people with venereal diseases, HIV, broken homes, all of these problems, most of which go back to what? The world's view of pleasure. You know, Satan, you can't have fun without getting drunk, getting high, being immoral, or doing something that you shouldn't do. That's the world's view of living it up. But then other people view life from a fatalistic view. And what I mean by that, well, you know, whatever's going to be is going to be. I'm just going to live and let the chips fall where they may. And this is nothing more than non-theological predestination. And I've heard people say, oh, well, you know, when your time comes to die, you're going to die. I had a man say that to me in Bible class, and I said, no, you're not. I said, you step out on 270 in front of a Mack truck doing 70 miles an hour, you're going to die whether it's your time or not, I guarantee it. Now, that's not to say that I know when or I am or am not going to die, but there are things you can do to hasten your death. And we've been talking about some of them: drugs, alcohol, immoral living. Get behind the wheel of a vehicle impaired by chemicals. Chances are you're going to die a little sooner, or at least be maimed. And because of this, a lot of people, what do? They go spend money at, what are they called, mediums, you know, palm readers, to find out what the future holds. How many people do you know that won't go out without reading their horoscope every day? And that again baffles me, that people would actually waste time reading that and actually believe that influences their life. No, life is not fatalistic. Life is what we make it to a great extent. Granted, sometimes life may deal us a lemon. But what do? You make lemonade with it. Life gives us problems. We deal with the problem. We make the best of it. We don't just roll over and say, oh, well, that's life. Fatalism is not the view of the child of God. Still others view life as something that must be changed, and even some Christians have this social change idea. Oh, we've got to change the world. We've got to right social injustices, and we've got to change this and change. I find it interesting, you never saw Jesus marching on Rome for the rights of slaves, or to fight the oppression of the lower class people. You don't find Paul saying, take to the streets. Now, I'm not defending social injustice or those things, but that's not our primary responsibility as Christians. Our work, our job, if you will, as Christians is what? To preach the gospel. And frankly, if you want to make the world a better place, what better way to do it than by preaching the gospel? You know how slavery has come to an end in most of the world today? Through Christianity, or at least through Bible teachings. In fact, today, the only countries that still have slavery are countries where the Bible is banned and the Quran is the ruling religious book. You know, we say that the Civil War ended slavery in America. Even without the Civil War, I think it would have come to an end through the teachings of the Bible. The reason I say that, because every other nation that has had slavery since the time of Christ, eventually slavery died out because of the influence of Christianity. So our goal is not social reform, not a social gospel, but we should view life as doing the work that God given us to do. Still other people view this life as nothing more than a reincarnation of a former life. And I don't know how much you've read and studied about reincarnation, but reincarnation has its roots in the Hindu religion. You know, and there's a lot of variations. Other groups have taken it, but the Hindus are the ones who originally set forth this idea that you know, when you die, you come back as some other being, either a higher or lower level. And there are people who still believe that in America today. And you'd think with all of our enlightenment and teaching that people would realize that you know, this life is it. It's appointed to man once to die, and then cometh the judgment. If the Bible is right, reincarnation cannot be. If reincarnation occurs, then inspiration is wrong. Sadly, a lot of people view life as something they want to end. Suicide is one of the leading causes of death in America today. And even sadder yet to me, one of the highest levels of suicide is in preteen through teen years. You know, the 8-year-old boy who committed suicide, 3-4 months ago in Cincinnati, that really bothered me. When I read it, it just boggled. What does an 8-year-old know about suicide? And I understand he was being bullied, I understand. But, you know, we all had bullying growing up. But the idea, the mentality that our society has, hey, if you don't like the problem, just end it all. Take your life. I got all the way through college without knowing anyone who committed suicide. But I've known quite a few in recent years. And again, it's because we've gotten away from God's philosophy of life, from the biblical viewpoint. You know, today, it's the easy way out. I can't face the problem. I can't deal with this. I'll just end it. And certainly that's not what God has in mind. This next one you probably find comical. A lot of people view life as something that can be regained later. How many of you know what cryogenics is? It's where you die of a certain disease and they put your body in super sub-freezing temperature. In other words, you're flash frozen, and they will keep you in cold storage until a cure is found for whatever your problem is. And of course, you pay a lot of money for this. They will take you out and replace whatever needs replacing or fix whatever needs to be fixed, and you're alive again. In fact, Wayne Jackson in Stockton, California was one of the places that did this. And basically it was a huge freezer full of dead people who had paid tens of thousands of dollars to be frozen. And Wayne jokingly referred to them as corpsicles. And the company went bankrupt, and the electric company was threatening to turn off the power. And so there was a court case, and I don't know what was finally decided, but the power company said, we cannot keep running this place. And the company said, we don't have the money to pay the electric bill. But, you know, the underlying question is this. Maybe they can put a new heart in. Maybe they can put in a new liver, a new kidney, or whatever you need and thaw you out. But there's still one little problem. Who's going to put the soul back in? When you die, what happens to the soul, the spirit? It returns to God, to the Hadean world. Do we really think that with cryogenics, you know, they thaw out my body and they fix the parts, that they're going to be able to put the soul back in? Again, another very warped and distorted view of life. Well, by that clock, we're a minute after, and I've still got a couple of things to go. Any questions or comments? But the point I was getting at with this, there are a lot of different views of life, but you know, the Christian view of life is the only one that really makes sense. The Christian perspective of life. It's not fatalistic, it's not reincarnation, it's not all about pleasure, it's not about a drudgery, it's not something to be ended, but rather life is all about serving God, serving others, as Megan pointed out from those passages she read. It's about serving God, it's about serving others, and preparing self for eternity. All right, we'll stop at that point for right now then. I haven't heard the bell, but